Hey friends, I'm Daniel Nesbitt, and welcome to the Fixing Your Font series. So rather than going through and step by step showing you how I draw characters and letters and going through the usual process that you've seen on this channel, I thought it would be fun to take a different approach to designing type. So what you see on my screen here is a font that I've put together. And some of this draws on some of the struggles, pitfalls, that kind of stuff that I ran into when I was designing a font. And I thought I would basically combine this into one mega fix-it font that I'm calling it. And we could sit and talk about the different challenges and things that don't appear to be quite right with this font, and how we might going about fixing them, and even just things to look out for as you're designing letters. So this particular series, at least with this font, will be geared towards a sans serif, especially towards those who are starting out in type design and trying to figure all this stuff out maybe for the first or second time. I may be open in the future to extending this series to your fonts. So if that is something that you are interested in, by all means hit up the comment section under this video and let me know. I'm not exactly sure how I might go about this yet, but kind of the initial thought is that I may include a form or something like that where you would be able to submit a font, of course with the idea that it could potentially become an episode on this channel, but something that I can kind of go in, maybe take a deep dive through a couple letters and talk about what I might do to effectively fix your font. So kind of a critique, but kind of a way to show folks maybe different ins and outs, tips, tricks, what have you for type. So I'll make sure to remind everybody at the end of this episode as well. But for this one, I'm probably going to go over a couple episodes here. I don't want to go through the entire alphabet in one go because that would be one heck of an episode. But what I do want to focus on, at least in this one, is the lowercase, and we're just going to get through a couple letters in this one. I may not go through and apply what I do to one example through all of the similar letters in here, but perhaps this will just be enough for you to go back and maybe take a more critical look at a typeface that you're working on. So my first plan of attack for this will be to focus on my control characters, which as we know from other episodes and other videos here is the basically O, H, N, and O. And like I said, I'll be focusing on the lowercase ones to start. A lot of what I will be talking about though on these letters will affect other things, in this case with the N, things like the H or the M, that kind of thing. So, some things to note about where we're at right now. Number one, every single stroke that you see in this font is literally the same width. I think I set it to 80 point. You may notice if with a keen eye that there might be some that look a little bit different or a little bit off or whatever. But for the most part, every single stroke, whether it's a vertical, horizontal, diagonal, if it's round, they're all the same size. They're all 80 point. The other thing is I haven't done any magic with this as far as things that we'll get into, like overshoots or anything like that. Geometrically, everything is perfect. Everything you see is a perfect circle. So there's going to be a lot to unpack here. I can't imagine that too many fonts would have exactly these problems. But part of the reason that I wanted to start with something so geometric is quite often, and I was one of these people, that my first font actually did look a little bit on the geometric side. A quick aside, I no longer have that font. I would happily show it if I still had it on the channel, but unfortunately I don't. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to focus on the lowercase n. And for the sake of this tutorial, I do have some guides set here. So if you're following along and you want to set this up yourself. So in glyphs under my masters, and this is glyphs 3, I've got a couple columns here. This first column is just the measurements for my ascender, cap height, X height, so on and so forth. The second line here with the 16s and the negative 16s is going to be for my overshoot. These are all the default settings in glyphs, and I'm just leaving them as is. As far as the font itself goes, nothing is super outrageous or exciting or anything like that. It is literally just what I told you at the start here, that it's just as geometric as you can possibly get it. So let's talk a little bit about strokes and kind of where I would start with this N. So the first thing, and I actually noticed I did kind of muck this up a little bit here, so I'm going to, I guess, fix this, break it, fix it. I don't know what's the right phrase for it. But effectively what we've got here is we've got a curve here that kind of goes over, creates the actual N shape. But when I look at it here, even though technically the top of the stem here and the top of the curve of the N, they're technically the same height. They hit the same point at the apex here and then the top here. This part looks lower than this part. And this is one of the first things that we learn in type design, is that round shapes, and even pointy shapes for that matter, need overshoot. So the first thing that I would do if I was working on this would be to hop in here, and I'm just going to move the apex of this curve up by 16 points, which is what my setting was. So now when I look at this, I mean, this curve now does look a little bit taller than that N, but to your eye, this is going to look quote-unquote correct. The next thing that I'm looking at when I'm designing this N here, and I'm actually, I'm going to go ahead and put two N's on screen so you can watch me edit one, and then I'll do my best to keep the zoom in a good place here. You can see how it affects an actual filled-in character on the other side here. But the next thing that I want to do is we're going to just take some measurements here. So I said that it was 80 points there, and it's 80 points there. Usually a vertical stroke is in the case of this left one here on the N. This is going to look a little bit narrower than a horizontal stroke. So usually what we want to do is create a stroke in a way where this one is technically going to be a little bit thinner at this apex area here, but as far as our eye sees it, and if we look on the other side, I just bumped it up by 10 points, which might actually be a little much. I'm going to go 5 instead. So we keep this optical illusion that it looks like an 80-point curve here, but it's actually not. So we'll kind of thin out our vertical or our horizontal strokes so that they have the illusion that they look the same width as the vertical strokes. If you are working in glyphs, this is one moment where I like to point out that the little dimension panel here will be of great value to you, because those two numbers that we just came up with, 80 and 75, I can kind of keep a little notepad here. So 80 points for my vertical stroke, 75 for kind of that curve. And now if I'm working on anything else, like an H, M, U, etc., I've got those notes there. I don't have to keep remembering that every time I'm going back to that. The next thing that I'm going to work on here is this curve or this arc. So right now this is a perfect arc, and we kind of run into some problems with that because if I look on the filled in side here, there is kind of these dents that occur, and they're right about where these points are as well, if you can kind of envision where those points would be. And we really don't want that. We want it to look like a smooth arc. If you think about when you're writing by hand, that's not something that you would really do. Your hand naturally kind of starts to curve a line before you actually make the curve, if that makes sense. Something that I do to alleviate this is just by holding down the Option key, and I use the arrow keys on my keyboard. And in this case, I'm actually going to hold down the Shift key as well, so that I'm moving in increments of 10 points. But if I just bump it down maybe like by 10 points or something like that, or 20 points, what I'm doing here is I'm keeping the handle of my Bezier curve put, but I'm moving the point that it references from down. So I'm actually creating a bigger curve. And what this does is it actually smooths these points out so that it looks more like that natural curve that your hand might have when you're writing this. Another thing I could do if I wanted, and it actually gets to my next point about this curve up here where it looks just a little bit too perfect. If I hold down the Shift key and select the Bezier handles, and maybe I just go up by we'll go by 10 points there. I kind of went back and forth a little bit. But what this does is it kind of helps even the curve out, gives it more of a natural feel to it. But it also makes my arc here a little less round, which sounds counterintuitive, but it actually makes it look a little bit more natural as well. So that kind of settles our curve a little bit. The last thing that I would look at on this N here is this space where my the shoulder of my N here curves down into this left-hand vertical stroke. So what happens here is, while technically we have a shape that is more or less the same width as the vertical stroke here, I know there's kind of a 5-point difference, but we'll roll with this for a moment. But what happens is we kind of create this really big space here where it looks like there's a lot more mass in this area than there would be at any other point in the letter, and it actually kind of gunks up the letter form a little bit, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to read than usual. So what I might do here, for just kind of the sake of getting started, is I'm going to take this point that goes to the outer edge, where this curve would come down and touch the outer left edge of the left stroke, and I'm actually going to bump it in. And usually what I do is I start at about the halfway point of the width of my stroke. So in this case, this point is 40 points from either edge, because it's an 80-point width of my stroke here, so this is smack dab in the center. And what you'll notice when I do this is it actually thins this up a little bit, but visually it looks like it's all even, and it looks like the weight is better proportioned. Now the other problem this creates, though, is our curve does get a little bit funky here because it's really, really tight leading up to here, and then it loosens up as we get back. And this brings me to the last point on the N here, which is when you're drawing curves, you really want your points to be where kind of the natural apex would be. For the N in this case, I'll only select one element at a time here. I'm going to grab that top point, and I'm actually just going to nudge it over a little bit there. And in this case, I just went over 20 points. And so what this does is this point here is roughly centered between this point on the very right side of my character and then this point that we moved on the left hand as well. So this point is centered between the two that it touches on the inner circle, and then on the outer circle, this one does the same. And it helps make your character look a little bit more even. Now, since I really didn't save a before and after, the best I can do is bring back up the H here, but I think this still is a suitable kind of before and after here, but already you can see that it looks already a lot better with just those few adjustments. Now, specifically for the N, this isn't really something that you can do with the H, but something that you may consider if you're kind of looking at this space where the two lines meet. If you're still not happy with how this is shaping up, or maybe you've kind of determined this might be the style for your letter, sometimes I like to add a point hidden behind this horizontal stroke that's coming in. And if I grab this top point above here and just kind of nudge it over a little bit, you can move this around a little bit. It kind of opens up this notch a little bit more. It's something that I usually look at doing, especially if I intend the type to be used at smaller point sizes, maybe from like 18 point down or 20 point down. And what it does is it just kind of opens up this notch and makes it a little bit more noticeable because you really don't have that tall vertical line that the H has, and it really helps open things up a little bit. So those are some of the most common things that I see with N's or shapes like the N. And honestly, that there really wasn't a whole lot to it. It's just kind of knowing how these little optical tricks and optical illusions might affect things. So if we're happy with that, which I am, I'm just going to go through and we're going to copy this over to the H here, and we'll see how things how things look here. So again, just popping that over to the H, and it looks like we have a lot more even mass distribution as we go through that H, and it looks a little bit just better off. Now we do have characters like the L, which in this case for this font is just going to be a straight up and down line, so we really don't have to worry about that. The reason that I'm choosing the L as the next one here is just because it just mimics the left vertical stroke of the H. But I do want to talk about the eye. So when I drew the eye, I drew a square dot on top of the eye, and I've pushed it all the way to the top of my my lowercase ascender height. That's the word I'm looking for. And I really don't want to do that. And actually, one thing I did notice is I have two shapes copied on each other there. So I always want to make sure that that's taken care of too. I will point out the reason that I knew that, if you were curious or if you didn't notice. But you'll notice on my shape here, there's a little 1 in the corner, and there was a 3 in the corner of this one. That 3 told me that there's 3 elements here, because that was element number 3. I didn't see a 2, but by deleting that, and I guess that's probably a little bit from experience, but now I've got a 1 and a 2, so I have 2 elements, which makes sense because we have the stroke and the dot there. So anyway, with the eye, you'll notice on most eyes, if not all eyes, that the dot doesn't always go up to the top, and sometimes I actually like to bring that down a little bit, just so it looks like it's a little bit in better relation to the eye here. Really, how far you bring this down just kind of depends on your font, or how it's kind of shaping up, or its style, or its design. There's a couple other things that you might consider with that too. So in this case, the dot is a perfect square right now. Some fonts may actually make that a little bit bigger by dragging down the box so that it kind of has a little bit more mass that way, which can certainly be an option. Another thing that I've seen fonts do, just making sure that I think I have this, yep, 80 by 80. Another thing that I've seen fonts do as well, if you're not keen on making it longer like that, almost kind of like a line, is you may go through and actually, even though it's a square, add a little bit of effectively overshoot to it, just so that it kind of feels the same weight as the eye. Because the thing with a dot is sometimes you lose track of that a little bit. And I know I just got done saying, you know, curves require overshoot, but it's a little trick I've seen with some fonts where they just bump that up just a little bit, just to give it a little bit more presence, so that it doesn't look out of place next to the rest of the lowercase I. So with that out of the way, that's kind of where I'm going to stop for the square letters for now. What I've talked about here could be applied to things like the M or the U as well. And I do have some special notes to make on those two, but I think we can save that one for a future video. But I wanted to jump over to the round characters real quick, namely the O. So as I said, when I created this, that this was a perfect circle, and as we highlight, I guess it's not totally perfect yet. There, now it's perfect. Actually, I have my lock on there. There we go. So perfect circle, 500 by 500. And like we learned with the N, with the curved piece there, we do have to have a little bit of overshoot. So the first thing that I would do is we're just going to go ahead and resize this. So I should get up to 532, I think. Yep, 532. So what that tells me is that this point down here is now at the overshoot line below the baseline, top up here, same thing. The other thing to keep in mind with an O is that the height and the width are not always related to each other like this. I'm just going to go through and pull our lowercase n into the background here, because I do like to keep a little bit of a relationship between the two letters. So what I might do here is I might just take the O, and all I'm doing is I'm adjusting left to right. I'm not worried about top and bottom anymore. But I might just kind of have it where, in this case, just as a starting point, the edge of the N, of course I know I have a snap setting somewhere that's kind of messing with me, but effectively the left edge of the N here is running about halfway between these 2 points, similar to what we did with the curve here on the lowercase n. But I'm going to kind of use that as a starting point for the overall shape of the O. Now the other thing that I want to keep in mind as well is when you do have a perfect circle like this, we do have a few other things that we want to keep in mind. Number one, what looks like a perfect circle in font design is quite often not. Usually it has a little bit more of a squarish shape to it, or it feels like it's got a little bit more of a squat to it. there's a couple ways that you can go about handling this in glyphs. The first way is if you wanted to select just the handles here, similar to what we did on the N, and maybe bring it up a couple points here, and then we'll bring this one down a couple points. And right now I'm just focused on the outer shape of the N. And pretty much what my plan here is to make this curve here feel like this curve here. It may not actually line up technically, and I would even go as far as assuming it doesn't, which it doesn't really. I'm just trying to create the illusion that it looks similar. So don't get too worried if this doesn't look exactly perfect. Another way that you can go about this as well, just to undo this real quick, is there is a fit curve panel in glyphs. You can use these dots if you wanted to just select this as well, where the app automatically goes through and does this for you. Depending on your font, depending on your design, that may work for you. To note, when you see the 60 and 85% here, this is referring to where the handle is. 0% would be right on your point, and then 100% would actually line up with an extreme. So in this case, for this font, that would be 100% where the Bezier handle would be all the way out to the edge like this. And if it was the same in the other direction, you would kind of create a point like this. So what 60% and 85% are saying here is wherever 65% is between, we'll just draw a shape here to kind of visualize things a little bit. But if this edge was 100%, this point was 0%, there's a point at 60, I guess 60% would probably be somewhere around here to 85%, and that's where this this little graph or this little line is going to move things to. Now naturally you could go in and you could put any percentage you want there. If you want to go 120%, if you want to do 2% or anything in between, you're able to do that. I usually don't stray too far from 60 and 85 though. So since I already have it set up with the fit curve at 60%, we're just going to go ahead and leave that so we can keep moving along a little bit. Because the next thing I want to talk about is the stroke weight of an O. So one of the challenges with strokes is when you have a curve like this, it's going to feel a lot different than a straight stroke, a straight vertical stroke here. And in this case, what we want for the side here is actually to move this in just a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and, similar to what we did before here, just do a copy. So I'm going to have the N and the O this time. And effectively, what we're going to do is just line things up. Whoops. Make sure I get the right letter that I want here. So where I start is I've brought in the sides a little bit, which I'll show in a second. But the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the vertical one here with the N a little bit as well. I may adjust this a little bit as I kind of go here, but effectively what I'm looking for is this should be a little bit wider than my vertical plane stroke. So in this case, instead of 80, it's 88. And then in this here, that is 75, which actually does match up with my curve, and I'm happy with that. But as far as this here, I've determined that I think I want to make this a little bit wider. So let's do a little bit of math here. I think I want to add 6 units on each side, and if I did my math right, that should get me to 85. Yes. So if we go to our notes here, so we've got 75 for that top stroke, we've got 85 for the sides. I might go back and adjust this a little bit more still, but if I just kind of step back a little bit, you'll notice that the curve actually starts to look a little bit more in line with the N. If I just pull up a B again, I have to apologize. Actually, we'll just cheat here. There we go. So we kind of got a before and after on each side. So a couple things that I'm looking at is the overshoot now makes this O look the same height as the N. The added weight on the side here makes the weight feel more comparable to this weight, whereas this one looks a little bit thinner. And rather than having this perfectly round shape here, we've kind of got more of this oval shape, but it looks like it relates a little bit better to the N. So, and that's kind of the idea at the end of the day, is that the letters look like they relate to each other. Since I do have the B up, I could go ahead and grab the O and put that in. Actually, before I paste it, I'm actually going to delete the old one there. And similar to the N, we're going to make a couple changes here. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're just going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to line up the inner point on the left-hand side of the O with the edge of the stroke there. And then kind of like what I did with the N, where my curve hit the halfway point on the stroke here. I'm just going to jump back over. So if I select this outer circle of my O, again, kind of as a starting point, and this time I'm kind of doing this more by eye than by anything. Well, I guess I don't have to do it by eye. Let's maybe try this way. So we'll do four clicks in, if you will. And then again, we're just going to grab these 2 points. That should bring us out 2. Now the challenge is when I moved them out like that, I also kind of squared this up a little bit more. So what I'm also going to do is just kind of go and adjust these points by 2 back in. That way I just do a little bit better job of kind of honoring that curve. But again, similar to the N, I have this point, or this curve tapering into my vertical stroke here. So again, it looks like it's kind of the same weight or a similar weight. It doesn't look like it's getting bunched up. If I go and I pull my H back up as well, you'll notice that these 2 points, or these 2 spots here, look like they're pretty even in weight as well. And that'll be the big challenge when you're designing font, is making things look similar or look lined up or appropriate. So, but once you have the O like that, and even once you have the B like this, now it's easy if we wanted to go through and look at something like the D, the P, or the Q, arguably even the G, which I do want to get to at some point with the G, just to talk about a few things there. But we're able to effectively take this, and for your first font, I don't think there's anything wrong with just doing a little bit of copying and pasting, and just stealing characters from other places. There's nothing wrong with that. You will notice too, I'm just keeping my side bearings at 60 points on either side. At some point I may talk a little bit more about that, but for the time being, again, it's your first font, so we can kind of keep the spacing a little bit even for now. So I'm just going to go through. I just flipped my B upside down here, and I'm just trying to make sure, there we go, that I want this stroke to line up with the X height line. And then I'm just going to grab the bottom of this, line it up with the ascender. And then again with the Q, we're just going to flip it over there. We'll just go back and type in all of my spacings. So already you can tell there's a huge difference in how this is looking. These are little micro adjustments. They aren't anything that are super outrageous or anything like that. A lot of this is just knowing how your eye visualizes type, how we see and perceive these letters and these shapes, because while there is a way of technically being correct, it's not always how our eyes visually see it. And if there's anything that I've learned about type design in the time that I've been doing that, is that there are a lot of optical illusions to work through when you're designing a font. So I'm not going to let this episode go on too long, because I do want to kind of keep these in bite-sized pieces, especially if you're just looking back on these as reference, so you don't have to go and scrub through a ton of different letters. But like I said at the beginning of the episode, I do plan on going through the rest of this alphabet and just talking about some of the different challenges and things that you might face as you were designing a font. And also, like I said, if you are interested in kind of having this become a little bit of a Fix-It series, definitely comment below. Let me know kind of what the vibe is on that, if that's something that everyone is interested in. I think it could be kind of a fun way to add a little bit of fun to this channel. So if that's something you're interested in, throw a comment down below. If you haven't already, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well. In addition to this series, we do have a lot of other cool things coming up and even in the works right now, and you don't want to miss any of that stuff, because there's a lot of neat things that I'm excited to be sharing with everybody. So as always, I appreciate you watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.